Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Friday, June 21st, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news with Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta. And joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writer Hoai-Tran Bui.
Hey, everyone.
Okay, in a previous episode, I asked if there was any really good prequel movies. I'm maybe regretting asking this because we're getting tons of emails and whatever, which is good because it means people are listening and people actually are, the people listening are smarter than us because they're coming up with options that we did not mention. Wyatt C writes in that of all our discussions, he's wondering why we didn't mention the Planet of the Apes trilogy kicked off by Rupert Wyatt's Rise and concluded with Matt Reeves' Dawn and War. And I think that, I don't know, what do you guys think? I feel like that falls into maybe almost like the Chris Nolan Batman Begins territory where it feels almost more of a reboot than a prequel.
That's why I didn't mention it, but I think Wyatt is technically correct because all of this is it's its own thing, right? It's its own trilogy that leads into the existing movies. So yeah. I think he's technically correct, and I feel bad that we didn't mention that because I love that trilogy so much.
Yeah, it's amazing. I know Rise of the Planet of the Apes was positioned more as a prequel, and then Dawn and War kind of became more of their own thing under Matt Reeves. But yeah, it technically does count as a prequel, and a great one at that.
I feel like if those Matt Reeves movies didn't exist, that Rise of the Planet of the Apes would have come to all of our minds. Like, that feels like a prequel. Okay, Bill G writes in, Rogue One is a good prequel. It's a solid standalone movie, and that's also what makes a great prequel. It has its own story and actually enhances the viewing of A New Hope. That's what makes it good. It doesn't try to explain every tiny thing about a character we previously were introduced to, e.g. Solo, or explanations of a monster that we didn't need a complex origin story, e.g. Alien Covenant, neither of which needed to be explained. Okay, so guys,
is it though?
Is Rogue One a prequel? I mean, it is a prequel because it's set before the events of the original, right?
It's a prequel, but is it a good prequel is the question.
Oh, right. I like it. I don't love it.
Not a good movie, but I will say
HT.
I like what it's trying to do. Like, I understand where its ambitions are, and I kind of see the potential, but God, the first half of that film is such a mess, and it only slightly redeems itself in that final 30 minutes. But I wouldn't say it's a good movie.
Yeah, totally on your side on this one, HT.
You guys are so wrong. This is a good movie, and I do agree with Bill that this does make A New Hope a better movie. Like, it makes a glaring flaw that I feel like if New Hope came out today, it's kind of like that Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark scenario where, I feel like people would be giving Raiders of the Lost Ark today, if it came out, problems about the climax. That Indy really has nothing to do with ending that climax. I feel like A New Hope, if it came out today, there would be so many of those cinema sins and wrong videos about the flaw in the Death Star. It would be the big thing that everybody's making fun of, right? And I feel like Rogue One finally makes that whole thing mean something.
You're right, but the movie leading up to that tiny explanation doesn't quite warrant existence, except for the last 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I don't know. I think you guys are wrong. And by the way, you are in the minority here because I think Rotten Tomatoes and both IMDb and Flickster and all those things are in the positive. So
yeah, but what does that really mean? That just means that people that could mean anything, Peter. Your reliance on trying to put numbers on. I'm
not trying to put numbers. I'm just saying the vast majority of people liked Rogue One. I'm not saying they loved it, but they liked it, and it seems like you guys both hated it. I'm baffled here, but okay. Anne from Washington D.C. writes in. He writes in some suggestions for a couple movies. Star Trek, the 2009 movie from J.J. Abrams. I think we all consider that a reboot, not really a prequel, and especially since it changes the timeline in a significant way. Like, so that's not really a prequel, right?
Yeah, would put that as a prequel. I would put that as a reboot, but we did talk about X-Men First Class being kind of a prequel, and that sort of reboots the timeline in a way as well. So,
yeah, he mentions that. He mentions that in his email, and he also mentions Casino Royale, the Bond movie with Daniel Craig. Is that a prequel?
It depends. I guess there's the theory out there that James Bond is like if you subscribe to the theory that James Bond, that all of the Bond movies are the adventures of one person, then maybe. But I think there's like theories out there that like maybe it's just a code name, and that sort of explains the different actors playing. And then you've got the whole M thing where like different. Judi Dench is serving as M for two different actors, so that's a complication there as well. So I don't know. That one's really complicated.
Yeah, I still feel like it's more of a reboot. I don't know. Yeah, okay. I think we're gonna end it here. So we're not gonna read any more emails of good prequel suggestions. But I appreciate everybody that sent in an email. And as always, you can send in your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com, and maybe we'll read your email in the mailbag. Let's get into the news. And just as we were about to hit record, some breaking news happened. It turns out that Transparent creator Jill Soloway is going to write and direct Red Sonja, taking over from Bryan Singer. HD, what do we know?
Yes, so Jill Soloway has been announced by Millennium Films to be the new director for Red Sonja after Bryan Singer was dropped earlier this year, back in February, following an Atlantic report levying a bunch of allegations against him. And he was tapped to direct the film last year, despite a lot of the backlash concerning that. And finally, he was dropped earlier in February. And now Soloway, who is best known for Transparent, will be directing the film in their first deal since directing the Transparent movie musical, first feature film deal.
Well, that is very cool, and it's a very different filmmaker than, the original filmmaker Bryan Singer, who obviously had a lot of controversy behind that. Ben, what are your thoughts on this?
I haven't seen any of Transparent. I was just looking up Jill Soloway's credits, and they've directed like I Love Dick and Afternoon Delight, a bunch of other things that I haven't seen. So I don't feel super I don't know, prepared to speak about like the quality of this person's filmmaking. But I do think that regardless of who it is, and especially in this instance, like Jacob was just looking this up, and he says that that Jill Soloway is going to be this person getting this job means that this is the biggest gig for a non-binary filmmaker in Hollywood history. Like, we can't even come up with another non-binary filmmaker that has been given an opportunity like this before. So, the idea of a female lead in a comic book, like a female-led comic book movie being directed by a non-binary filmmaker, on one hand, and then you've got Bryan Singer on the other hand. I mean, it's very clear which one is the more interesting option at this point in Hollywood history. So, I'm very interested, looking at it from a macro perspective.
Yeah.
And for a female icon like Red Sonja, I think this is a much better choice than Bryan Singer for sure.
100%. I've only seen the first season of Transparent, and I loved it. But I will say this. Like, a lot of the directing gigs, this is not a criticism at all, but, like, I would have never been like, let's give this person a gig directing this movie. But, I mean, that happens all the time. Obviously, John Watts made Cop Car and is now directing Spider-Man movies. So we have no idea what the abilities of a certain filmmaker and what their pitch was to the studio. I'm excited to see what it looks like, because I was not excited for a Red Sonja movie before this. Like, I mean, basically Red Sonja is kind of like a female Conan the Barbarian. Is that correct?
Yeah,
basically.
So, yes.
Yeah, and I never liked Conan, but so maybe I never read up on Red Sonja, so maybe there's something more there that will grip me. But okay, let's move on to the news that we had planned for this episode. Let's start off first with an Easy A spinoff, which is in development. Ben, what is going on?
Yeah, so Easy A was a movie that came out in 2010. You may remember it was Emma Stone's first big leading lady role, and it's a high school movie that is basically like a modern day riff on Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. And that movie is really great. I think it's like one of the best high school movies of the past 10 years, like right up there with stuff like The Edge of 17 and Booksmart and basically just those, really. I mean, especially ones with female leads.
It has such great writing. It has a great performance from Emma Stone. It's great.
Yeah, for sure. So Variety reports that Burt Royal, who is the person who wrote the original screenplay for Easy A, has been hired to write a spin-off and also direct it. So we don't really know much about the plot other than it's going to be set at the same high school, and it will explore many of the same themes as the original Easy A, but it will be focusing on a new group of students and teachers. So it's unclear whether Emma Stone might be coming back as some sort of cameo. I wouldn't be surprised if she did. Malcolm McDowell played the principal in the first movie, so maybe he'll stick around. Thomas Hayden Church and Lisa Kudrow played teachers in the first movie. Maybe they'll have appearances, but it's really too early to tell as far as that goes, because Burt Royal is still in the writing stage here. But interestingly, I was doing some research into this, and around the time that Easy A came out, he was giving interviews talking about how his original plan was to actually adapt 3 classic literary works and set them at the same school so that a few characters could appear across all 3 movies. So The Scarlet Letter was the first one. That was for Easy A. And then he mentioned that Cyrano de Bergerac and The Mystery of Edwin Drood were the other 2 works that he was hoping to adapt. And Cyrano de Bergerac is about a really talented guy who hates his huge nose, so a story about exploring body issues and stuff.
Wasn't that kind of adapted into that Steve Martin movie?
I think so, yeah. I remember...
what is the name of that?
I don't remember that. I remember the posters of that from and like images from my childhood, being like, "What the hell is Steve Martin doing here?" And because I had no idea what Cyrano de Bergerac was at that point. So, but yeah, you know,
Roxanne.
Yes,
that's right. Yeah, because that's the character's love interest in the play in that story. And then The Mystery of Edwin Drood is a Charles Dickens book that I think was never finished, but it involves, among other things, a choir master who is in love with his student. So you can sort of see how that could be, ported over into a high school setting as well.
I love this idea. I love the idea of creating a cinematic universe around modern readaptations of these classics. Like, I kind of wish, when they made 10 Things I Hate About You, which was a kind of a adaptation of Taming of the Shrew, they could have come up with this idea. Because
and there was another one too. I think the movie O was like a teenage high school movie that was an adaptation of Othello. So it seemed like
that in high school.
It seemed like there was some Shakespeare high school action brewing in the water, back in the whatever late 90s, early 2000s.
Late 90s, early 2000s. There's 10 Things. There was O, and then over on the Jane Austen side there was Clueless.
Oh yeah.
Right. I often forget Clueless is based on Jane Austen, but yeah. Okay, let's talk about Apple TV. They are going to be adding picture-in-picture functionality alongside maybe Netflix, who is testing the same functionality in desktop. HC, what is going on here, and why do I want to watch movies in picture-in-picture?
Well, I don't know whether you want to, but some people might. So a new tvOS software update from Apple TV that's coming this fall will allow users to have picture-in-picture functionality, which means they'll be able to stream 2 different programs at the same time. One will take up the entire TV screen, while another will sit in the corner and play something else. Not everything will be available for this picture-in-picture mode, but we were talking earlier about what this would entail. Like, why would people want to watch maybe 2 TV shows at the same time? But it seems like a function that is geared towards sports watching, which is something that a lot of people already do. They watch several sports games at the same time. I don't know. I don't watch sports. Maybe this is what you do. So apparently Netflix is also testing a similar feature that would be used on the desktop version of Netflix. And that is something that is currently being tested but is not yet being rolled out.
Yeah, but Netflix doesn't have sports. So what's going on here? Like, I guess
just wants to try everything.
So maybe like you're a parent who is showing your kid Despicable Me for the 100th time, and in the corner you can watch something that you like. I don't know. I don't see the benefit of this. I'm wondering, Ben, are you old enough to remember before the day of HD TVs, like that whole wave of people buying TVs? I feel like there was a wave like 4 or 5 years before that where people were buying TVs because of the new feature of picture-in-picture.
Very vaguely. I mean, the only reason that I really primarily remember it, and the only reason that I've ever used it in my life, is because some of the early concert DVDs had this sort of like alternate cam functionality where you could create picture-in-picture content or windows rather, where you could view different camera angles of the same concert at the same time. So like if you wanted to see the guitar solo or something in a smaller window, you could watch that and then just watch the more traditional wider angle in the main window or something along those lines. So I remember sort of messing around with that stuff, and there were buttons on the remotes back then that would let you do this, because this was like the big deal with DVD players and a lot of these early concert footage discs and stuff, but that sort of fell away. So
yeah, well, it was pitched as a future, but then when you clicked on it to switch the camera angle, it would like take a few seconds to load. So I feel like it would never quite took off.
Yeah.
But
so the interesting thing about Netflix is that it's actually a pop-out player. So it will be so it's the big screen will go into a smaller screen, and then you can multitask apparently, which is why it's being catered towards the desktop. So I guess it's for people who are watching Netflix at work, really.
Yeah, I mean, YouTube already has that kind of functionality. HT, I know you watch a lot of Netflix and stuff on your computer. Like, is that something you could do? Like, be browsing the web and Facebook while you're watching a movie in the corner?
I mean, I have done that before when I worked in an office, but actually watching it for work, I feel like would be a disservice to whatever I am watching, unless I'm watching like the new Adam Sandler movie or something. But I mean, I could see this being frequently used because it's already kind of used in Facebook, for example. But I don't know. It feels like Netflix is just denigrating its content even more than it already does.
Yeah. It also occurs to me, like, when I mentioned that whole, there was that whole wave of picture-in-picture TVs, that when Back to the Future Part 2 came out, the future of TV was, like, this, like, projection screen TV that, like, you could watch, like, 20 different channels at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Like...
That sounds like a nightmare.
Never happened. I on my Apple TV, I have PlayStation View, and that allows you to watch... I think 4 channels at the same time, but I've never used it because what's the point? But it is kind of cool. You can move your remote around and like pick which of the 4 cubes you're hearing the sound from. Yeah. So anyways, if anybody has PlayStation View, you can do that. Let's move on to Kevin Feige, who is out promoting Spider-Man Far From Home, and he's been asked about this new Black Widow movie, which we think is going to be a prequel, and he is comparing to Better Call Saul. Ben, what is going on here?
Yeah, so weirdly, Marvel has yet to specifically, officially announce that the Black Widow movie even exists, even though it's filming right now. But Kevin Feige was asked about this film. The question was basically like, potentially, how could a Black Widow prequel move the MCU forward in Phase 4, even though it takes place, years before the events of Avengers Endgame, where, spoiler alert, Black Widow dies in that movie. And he said, there's always a method, and doing things in an unexpected way is something we find fun. There are ways to do prequels that are less informative or answer questions you didn't necessarily have. And then there are ways to do prequels where you learn all sorts of things you never knew before. I look at Better Call Saul as a wonderful example of a prequel that almost completely stands on its own apart from Breaking Bad, because it informs you about so many things you didn't know about before. So time will tell which way we've gone with a supposed Black Widow movie.
Yeah. When we were talking about prequels, one of the best that we came up with was Better Call Saul, which is a TV series. So I like that he's comparing it to that, but what could this possibly mean for a Black Widow movie? I mean, like, I feel like you can't introduce, like, another Black Widow or something, because why wouldn't she be around during the events of Infinity War and Endgame? H.T. Ben, do you have any ideas?
I wonder if he's just talking about the quality of Better Call Saul versus the actual content of it, because Better Call Saul, in regards to our discussion about prequels before, is kind of the gold standard for prequels now, because it just takes a character who was supporting before and just runs with it and makes it so much more rich and complex. And so I still don't really know what direction that this could go in, but I'm guessing that this is just their goal in terms of how they're going to turn Black Widow from sort of a mess and of an inconsistent character into something that is interesting.
Yeah, if they do have any sort of larger mythological or, plot-related plans here, I'm wondering if he's maybe hinting at like a larger spy network that we don't know exists in the MCU yet, or maybe Black Widow is the only person that we've seen, because the MCU, as we've seen, they've done it before. Like Spider-Man: Homecoming is a good example, where years after they'll go back and show something that happened before and pick up a thread and talk about the consequences of certain actions. And consequences has been, like that theme has been a big deal in the MCU. And these movies, building one on top of the other, have created a really interesting tapestry where they can go back in among themselves and sort of like flesh out things that we didn't even know were there. And I think maybe he could be hinting at something like that. Like there's always the chance that they go back and flash back to certain areas and reveal that Maria Hill was a double agent, for example, or some, I'm just making things up, but there are so many different ways that they could go with the introduction of a secret spy network. And that's just off the top of my head, but there are a lot of things like that I'm sure he and his team could incorporate if they wanted to.
Well, there's also the idea, Endgame introduces time travel into the mix, which makes things insanely complicated. We've talked about that on the podcast in the past. But obviously, Captain America going back in time to spend his life with his love, Peggy, does raise some interesting questions, because in that timeline, whatever that timeline is, if that's our time, the main timeline, or another timeline, has not been like 100% confirmed. But in that timeline, you'd think he would tell her that this organization she's starting up, S.H.I.E.L.D., is from the start being infiltrated by Hydra. Mm-hmm. So how would that, like, maybe Agent Carter sets up another spy? I mean, I guess she doesn't come from there. I don't know. Okay, I'm spitballing, and I don't have anything here. But I'm interested to see how they make people care, because I feel like once the stakes are taken out of things, I mean, we all know that the heroes are going to save the day in every one of these movies except for Infinity War. But I feel like once you say that we know that where this person is in the modern chronology of the MCU, like that takes a lot of stakes out of the mix. And I'm wondering, are people going to care about this prequel? So it'll be interesting to see how they do it. I know Marvel always has like an interesting take on things. So,
and Captain Marvel was a prequel too, and that one, performed really, really well at the box office. So we'll see.
Is Captain America the First Avenger a prequel?
I would say so. Yeah.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
So I guess. Oh,
there we go. We have another one to add to the list.
Wait, did Captain America appear in a previous movie? Or is it just the setting is a prequel to? Yeah, I don't think he did. Right, that was his first appearance. Yeah, I don't know. I'm on the edge on that one. Yeah, I don't know. Okay. Anyways, I know people are going to email us now, so let's move on to DC Comics, who are killing off Vertigo. I'm actually very disappointed by this, because Vertigo is probably like next to Image is one of my favorite comic book labels. They created things like Y the Last Man, Preacher, 100 Bullets. HC, what's going on here?
Well, DC Entertainment has shut down its Vertigo imprint, and this comes just 1 year after it had a company-wide shakeup to attempt to rebrand it as DC Vertigo. But now it will be shutting down along with DC Zoom and DC Inc. YA to be replaced by age-labeled brands that will be called DC Kids, just DC, and the DC Black Label for 17 years and older. So all of the series that are currently ongoing under Vertigo will be either finishing up or transitioning over to the DC Black Label, where most of the Vertigo titles will be heading. But this is under a part of a restructuring of the company's DC Comics divisions to publish all of their content under the DC brand. So the problem is apparently that Vertigo doesn't have DC in it. But yeah, this ends a 26-year legacy that closes out great and classic and award-winning titles, like you said. Sandman, Preacher, 100 Bullets, Why the Last Man, Fables, classics like Hellblazer and Swamp Thing, and it's really the end of an era.
I mean, I get it from a corporate perspective. You want to have like one brand, but the thing that worries me here, when you create this DC Comics Black Label, I feel like something like 100 Bullets or Fables would probably not they would be like wouldn't happen today under the DC Comics, quote unquote Black Label. So, I'm worried that, we're not going to get these weird, more kind of independent stories without, people in tights and capes and stuff like that. But, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. So, okay, let's move on to our last story. Mark Hamill hopes that he's done with Star Wars after Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, so on a recent red carpet, I think it was probably for the Child's Play movie, since he is the voice of Chucky in that, somebody asked if this, meaning Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, this year's movie, is going to be his last Star Wars appearance. And he said, "I sure hope so." And the reporter said, "Why?" And Mark Hamill said, "Well, because I had closure in the last one. The fact that I'm involved in any capacity is only because of that peculiar aspect of the Star Wars mythology where if you're a Jedi, you get to come back and make a curtain call as a Force ghost." So that seems to be confirmation that's indeed Luke Skywalker will be a Force ghost in this movie. He's not going to appear in flashbacks, although I guess that's still a possibility, but it sounds primarily like he's going to be appearing in Force ghost form. And then, yeah, the surprising thing here is that according to Mark Hamill, he's going to be done with Star Wars, and this is a franchise that's been a huge part of his life for more than 40 years. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes back to just lend his voice to an animated short, or maybe pops up again in some sort of other small capacity outside of the movies. But I mean, talk about end of an era. If Mark Hamill is really walking away from Star Wars for good, then that's a big deal as well.
I mean, on one hand, this is being marketed as the end of the Skywalker saga. So it's like, duh, yeah, of course he's done with Star Wars. But on the other hand, I'm very cynical and skeptical because, Rey, I feel like after this movie, do we expect, HT, do you expect there to ever be another movie with Rey in it?
I mean, not a movie, I would think, but maybe a TV show or a comic book. I would expect they wouldn't want to just get rid of that character for good because she is such a pivotal part. Luke Skywalker is such a pivotal part of the franchise. So, I
feel like if they continue her story, she would be talking to Luke. Luke's her only, tied to the Jedi and to the Force. Do you know what I mean? It would be her first Force ghost, just like Obi-Wan was Luke's.
Well, what if she does that in The Rise of Skywalker? And what if that movie ends, as J.J. Abrams has indicated, it's going to be, a full culmination of 9 movies? What if they find a way at the end of The Rise of Skywalker to close the gate, basically, between this realm and wherever the Jedi Force ghosts are hanging out, and make sure that nobody
spin-off of the Jedi Force ghosts
make sure that they can never communicate with the earthbound plane ever again.
I mean, it is a huge deal, especially with Last Jedi, because Yoda was able to, as a Force ghost, have physical contact. He was able to create storms and light that tree on fire. And doesn't he hit Luke with his cane or something at some point? So that tells me that you could have effects on the physical world after the dead. What if the Sith figured out how to harness that power of being a Force ghost? That could be dangerous. So maybe you're right, Ben. Maybe there's a way of shutting that all down. But I assume that's not going to happen. But I don't know. It'll be interesting. Anyways, that brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find this podcast, Slash Film Daily, published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to peter@slashfilm.com, and rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and have a good weekend. Cool, guys.